Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. So my name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And on today's episode, we are talking to the head of people culture and change at Emotion Consulting. We're speaking about a very topical subject today, just in light of the recent news of the 26-year-old female chartered accountant at Ernst & Young based in India, who recently passed on allegedly due to work-related stress, excessive workload, and a toxic work culture. We are talking about how to create and promote a healthy workplace culture and exactly what it means when we talk about organizational cultures, and if these organizations that we do work for are prioritizing a culture of employee health and well-being. Welcome to Wellness in the Workplace.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. We were having quite a detailed discussion off air, and I'm hoping some of those insights can actually just, come into the conversation now. But maybe to just dive into the topic at hand, and, I did lay a bit of context around, what is happening with regards to just the news report, of what happened with the 26-year-old chartered accountant at EY. And what that has done is really just sparked a debate, right, around what's organizational culture and what healthy looks like when we talk about organizational culture. So maybe we can just start off by a common definition of what that is, just based on your experience, and just to give a bit of context exactly as to what healthy looks like when we walk into our jobs every Monday morning.
Yeah, so I think there's always two sides, right? There's the textbook definition of culture, and then you slap on a prefix or a suffix, right, that predicates healthy. Mm-hmm. Now, culture is culture, mm-hmm. right? Whether it's healthy or not depends on many things. And when I saw that LinkedIn post that you're referring to, I'm a comments crawler. Mm-hmm. So I went straight into the comments, and you'll see that the comments aren't all sympathetic and supportive under that post. I mean, if you haven't gone in there already, do so. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I looked at when I read that article is, like, at first I thought it was a South African incident. Mm-hmm. Like, I thought somebody from ENY here, mm-hmm. and I was like, sure, that's very hard to contact, to think about. And then it as you read further, you realize it's in India, and mm-hmm. and for me, it's always important to appreciate that organizational culture exists within the broader context and culture of the place where it's happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, you and I come out of a global business, mm-hmm. and yes, it had this core set of very easily and readily identifiable South African cultural mores and values.
Yes.
But I had the fortune of working in and with people across the globe, mm-hmm. from the same organization. Mm-hmm. And there was a San Franciscan flavor in San Francisco. There was a Sydney flavor in Sydney. In Singapore, it was quite different. When you hit London, it was this happy mix of South African and British. So culture is what culture is. For me, my favorite definition of organizational culture, there's two of them. Mm-hmm. The one is, how do you feel about, and how it makes you feel is, how do you feel on Sunday evening, sure. before the Monday morning, sure. of going to work. Mm-hmm. So if you're anxious before the typical South African 8:00 movie about what's going to happen in the office tomorrow, then you are not in alignment with the culture of your organization. Or if your organization makes you feel a way that's uncomfortable, then there is misalignment. Then you go into the conversation around, why is there misalignment? Mm-hmm. It might be something simple. I'm a broad strokes, I like to think, right-brained individual. Mm-hmm. If you put me in a detail-oriented left-brain organization, I'm going to be uncomfortable. Not because the culture is bad, but because it just isn't a fit. They're going to be talking detail and numbers the whole day, and I'm going to sit there waiting for color and form, and it's not going to come. And that's what we always need to consider and be intentional about. We have history is littered with organizations where the culture is clearly positioned as unhealthy, but because you want that company's name on your CV, you trade it off. And you go, you know what, I can work like that and live like that for 2 years. When I come out of there, I'll have Chucky Industries on my CV, and when people see Chucky Industries, A, they'll know what I've survived. B, they'll know that company doesn't mess around and does some serious work and sets me up for the rest of my career. But that case is terribly, terribly sad, because no organization, manager, or work context should put you in that dark place where the only answer, and this is the tragedy of suicide, where the only answer you see as viable is the permanent exit. That for me is a tragedy, and it could be a compound of things. I mean, I have cousins who work in factories in Lesotho, and the reality is you can be as good as you want or can at your job. It's lower order work in some instances, and there are 200 people at the gate waiting for one person to stuff up inside. Right? And management knows this. So, no, I'm not going to put you on a performance improvement program. And I'm going to say, Mbali, thank you very much for your service. And get Mbali 2 from literally outside my gate and sign her up, and she'll be working now. So, what kind of pressures exist in outside of the ENY context in India probably had a big part to play.
Sure. So many questions are coming up, I mean, as you're talking. But one that I just want to spend a little bit of time on is that point around alignment or misalignment that you spoke about. Because I think we overlook that in the prospect of employment, in the prospect of, like you said, having a certain company on your CV. But in breaking down what alignment actually is, what would you define that as, and what are some of the components that one needs to take into account to assess if they are aligned or misaligned to the organization that they're working for?
So the cool thing about organizational culture is that there's as many of them as there are organizations. The not so cool thing is that sometimes it's left up to chance and it's not intentional. But if we sat down and you and I started a business, and we sat down and we were very clear about what we want this business to do to generate revenue, because that's why we're in business. If we're clear on our outcomes and the goals that we seek, and we're clear on how we want to get to those goals and the outcomes, we can then start thinking about the capabilities that we need to bring into the business, so the skills. But we also we actually want humble overachievers. Not cocky know-it-alls. Both type of employee may have the same skill set, but we don't want somebody that beats their own chest. We want somebody that gets stuff done and moves on to the next thing, because that's who we are. What is it, that famous speech from The Fixer? Gladiators in suits. Like who doesn't want to be a gladiator in a freaking suit, man? But they're lawyers. But they just want that culture. They want to be competitive. They fight for what they claw and fight for every inch they get, and that's the organizational culture, right? They do the same thing as any other law firm, but they identify themselves as X for the purpose of Y. And if you're in that organization and you are an artiste, you're gonna struggle. because you're going to be surrounded by people who identify as gladiators.
Yeah.
And then you get the cultural misalignment.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm hearing a value system of some sort.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a personality of some sort that one needs to actually assess in relation to the culture that they might be going into. But then how do you balance diversity, inclusivity, and belonging if there's a specific type of personality or background that, you know, an organization is looking for in light of the culture that they want to promote?
You have to be clear. And again, you know, this whole narrative around balancing stuff, right? So balancing, you know, equity or I guess demographic equity in your business means that you have two things on an opposite scale, and you know you don't want one to tip over, right?
Sure.
But pick the right things that you want to balance, because you might find that Basotho and Maseru have more in common with Afrikaans men in the Free State than they do British people of British heritage from Cape Town. Right? And what is it that makes those two culturally diverse sets of people the same? And it could be the fact that, you know, that part of the world is typified by hard work, and if you don't work for it, you're not going to get it. And community is big in both people, in both cultural settings. And so it goes. So when you meet, you might look very different, but at the base, you have those similarities. So I think balancing the obvious things, and I've watched this podcast before, so I know we're not talking surface at the surface here, but diversity at the surface. So whether I'm pink, white, green, or yellow is probably less important than how far apart or how close are we on the things that matter in achieving our outcomes. So, you know, you and I are very familiar with a certain commercial and legal executive. And, you know, the one time I ran up to her office because we were faced with a bit of a crisis. We were in the middle of triple BEE verification at Bright House, and there was a conundrum. So I built up the courage to knock on her door, because you don't knock on that door without like serious business.
Yes.
And I said, look, this is what we're doing. And then she looks at me and goes, okay, Themba, so what are you trying to do here? Achieve the letter of the codes or abide by the spirit of the codes? And actually, if your answer is one or the other, you must leave, because then you haven't thought about this properly. But if you've thought this through, then let's continue talking. And it boiled down to the fact that the decision we had to make was going to cost us points.
Sure.
But it was moving the narrative forward in the transformation angle. And once we made that decision, then rejigging everything else became easy. Right? And for me, that was, you know, one of these cultural moments of truth where I realized that, okay, this is what the company that I'm working for is about. They yes, we want to maintain the right, you know, triple BE level so that we can access the kind of opportunities in the market that this thing unlocks. But we're not going to do it just because. We're going to do it in the spirit of what this thing is trying to achieve.
Yeah. And that's the intentionality behind a culture that is created with a strategic objective in mind, right? I mean, you speaking about this commercial legal executive, and that brings in then the conversation around the role of leadership when we're talking about building and sustaining an organizational culture. And often it is said that leaders drive the culture of an organization. And I'd just like to get your perspective on that, and the importance of then having the right leadership with the right mindset and who are also committed to the right vision in driving the outcomes that are needed, for any business.
Yeah. Hugely important.
Yeah.
And again, I guess it depends on where you grew up organizationally, right? But I've always had, for the large part, because I've witnessed poor leadership too, right? But for the large part, I've been able to role model readily visible and true leadership. I mean, you and I were talking earlier about, I joined a business to do something for the second time in my life, and all things being equal, this thing looked like it was going to be that thing on paper.
Sure.
And one of the key differences was around, and look, I was 10 years older than when I'd done it the first time, so maybe the it's not true ceteris paribus, but it's almost impossible for you to get to where you're going if nobody is leading, including yourself, right? So what I say about leadership is, again, goes back to one of my favorite cultural quotes, is culture is actually the worst behavior leadership will tolerate. That's what defines it. And the positive of that statement is then it would be all the great behaviors that leaders encourage. But if I walk into the office and somebody calls somebody else a cow, and I heard it, and everybody can see I heard it, and I continue walking. Open season, guys. Everybody can call everybody cows.
Anything.
Yeah. If I stopped and looked and put my hand on the person's shoulder and said, "Hey, Bali, we don't call each other that here." It goes back to another one of my favorite culture quotes: is all culture is the common way of how people here do things here.
Sure.
And that would then have signaled to everybody in the open plan that the next time you call somebody a cow, you're probably not identifying yourself as part of emotion consulting. You might want to go do that stuff elsewhere, because here and the people here don't do that.
That's not what we do. Another common and popular culture quote is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Might be overused, but still very relevant, right? Also just in light of what you were talking about. But I want to then talk about the more visible and tangible aspects of culture, because what you've just shared right now, more of the the intangibles, the feeling stuff. And I think that's where culture kind of gets lost in translation, because it is a feeling, and sometimes it's left up to subjectivity if it's not, monitored, or it's not guided or moved in the right direction. But I'm actually just thinking about, fresh grad out of university coming into a big corporate, and they're struggling to really, articulate what a organizational culture is, and if they are a fit, because they are feeling the intangibles but can't place it in the evidence and the physical evidence of what they can look out for. So what are some of the things then that physically one can really look out for in differentiating a healthy or unhealthy workplace culture?
Look, I think if you're in an organization and you don't know what the culture is like, then the organization is either unsure itself or it must do better.
Sure.
I remember walking into one of the telcos that's branded yellow into their offices.
Yeah.
Right? And everything there is yellow. Like when you walk into receptions, like yellow, like there's no mistaking which brand this is. But the African decor and the masks on the wall are painted yellow, white, and blue too. So I'm like, oh, I'm in a yellow business, but it's an African business because there's no, there wasn't any upholstery on the chairs at the reception. It was African chairs, the kind you'd find if you traveled, upwards into North Africa. They had a couple of yellow Basotho hats on the wall. They had African masks up. So after 10 minutes in reception, I was sure that I'm in an African telco cellular business. And then you look around and everybody is looks the same as you do, and it's not an alien environment.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for culture to be evident in almost everything. At Blue Sky, you walked into reception, you met a smiling person, and then you come around the corner, and the first thing you lay your eyes on is graffiti on 2 walls. And that sort of sets the tone for what kind of business we had. Lego skirting with pieces of Lego on it. But that speaks. But I'll give you one of my favorite entry stories. So we had a young lady who was joining as part of our academy program. Rocked the interviews, video interviews, rocked it. She was really, really good. And then she came to induction with all her piercings on. Right? We had never seen them before. And she had toned herself down for the interviews, and she walks in, and she's actually bigger than she looked, or more imposing in real life, right? So she walks into induction, right, with a bit of a swagger and all the piercings in. And I'm looking at her because I have a serious needle phobia. But I think she thinks I'm looking at her because I'm in shock. So she sits puffed up the whole morning, waiting for me to say something. I say nothing. And right at the end, like around about 3 o'clock when we were winding up induction, she goes, "So, Themba, is this going to be a problem?" And I said, "Look, here's why I've been looking at you. Like I have no ink. My ears are not pierced. I don't do anesthetic at the dentist because the pain of the syringe in my mind is greater than the pain of having a tooth ripped out without an anesthetic. So your piercings, if that's what you're asking, will only be a problem if you're going to be commuting between a Joburg client and a Cape Town one, because you're going to be late for every flight. Because as you cross that thing that goes beep, 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 beep at the airport, they're going to ask you to keep taking stuff off. But we didn't hire you because of how you looked. We hired you because you have an awesome mind and you're a developer. Now, your piercings don't interfere with how you think and how you code. So no, rock on. Day 2, she came in with a few less piercings. And I said, "Look, did I say something wrong?" She goes, "No, now that I know you're comfortable, it's okay."
Yeah, she was really pushing the boundaries.
She was
pushing the boundaries.
But culture is a little bit like faith, right? You have to be able to throw everything at it, and it shouldn't break. And that's what I find refreshing about some of the younger demographic that's entering the workforce. Like, they'll push. We did a whole return to work 3 days a week on a all hands call. Themba, come back for what? And I'm like, Mr. Chakela maybe, or just Themba, or
no, straight up,
Themba, come back for what?
Yes.
And the rest of my excos looking at me like, what are you gonna do? And I said, you know what? I hear you, and here's a commercial story, here's a team story, and here's an individual story, and there has to be reason in one of these areas for you to be here because you're part of this organization.
Sure. That actually brings me to my next question around encouraging that open communication as a means of promoting psychological safety in the workplace. I think psychological safety is one of the key tenets of a healthy workplace culture. And so how then can leaders, managers, and just companies in general encourage that?
By modeling it, right, and allowing it. We used to talk at Blue Sky about open door policies are for suckers. We have a no door policy.
Mm-hmm.
This thing is off the hinges. And you can walk in whenever you want to have a conversation. But be prepared for the worst response that I'll give you will be, sorry, not just now, I'm busy, but I'll loop back. But you should never feel like you can't come to me with anything. And people test it initially, right? And just do it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
But after a while, it becomes this thing that now people start bringing like the real issues to you. And yes, you had to suffer through 2 weeks of Themba, can you talk? Themba, can you talk? But it's hugely important, right? And I work intentionally in and you might have seen this. I work in 45-minute sprints. And the 15 minutes after my 45 minutes is our walk around. I have to. And I usually walk around and I bother other people. And they might tell me, Themba, not right now. But I have a social interaction every 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting in an open plan office, that can get quite exciting, or you can just, you walk around and you see somebody has got their head down and you have a short chat and so it goes. So I think open lines of authentic communication are important. Like there's nothing like a company that says we have an open door policy, and then in your first meeting with the manager, say, come in, close the door. I don't want Mbali to hear. Like you've already what if trust was the value, then you've already proven that's not the case. So I think as a leader, and this is something that leaders have to get better at, right? Because the older you get, the younger the people that are going to come speak to you are. So if you can't, if you're going to catch feelings because somebody calls you Bratemba, or, address you in a way that might not be worthy of your station, you might be missing a couple of things. And I find that's a lot of leaders are incredibly shy also, because sometimes executive success is dependent on your individual contributions. Like,
sure.
It's not a social party up the corporate ladder, right?
Yeah.
And by the time you get there, now you're a leader, and you have to, like, the people are watching, and I have to be responsible. So for me, it's something that you have to work on actively.
Yeah. Speaking about an intergenerational workforce, I can imagine the resistance to change that can come when you are enforcing a certain type of culture, especially if maybe there was one or there wasn't a defined one before. Or you're introducing certain elements to enhance an existing one. So how do managers, change managers, culture specialists then overcome that resistance to change, specifically considering the different demographics within the workplace and their styles of work and approaches on how to work?
Yeah, look, and I'll use an organizational example. So when you buy a business and roll it into your business, most people look at the financial upside and they look at the skills fit. And what we did at Bright House for a long time was we intentionally built in an integration stream, people integration stream, where we said by the end of the things we've done on that stream, Mbali should not be unclear that she is in Bright House, she has the same values as Bright House. She might have come from Mbali's Oracle practice, or we might have bought Mbali's Oracle practice with 15 consultants. But by the time we're done doing these interventions, they are fully Bright House. I mean, we even had that color Blurple as a brand.
Yeah.
And when we started those conversations, and the leadership in Bright House were either engineers or accountants. So things were very straight lines and right angles. But they gave us, who thought a little bit differently, the latitude to do those things, even though it created a longer journey to success and revenue. But you still meet people that say, my blood is still Blurple, and only somebody that was in that business in the sort of 2010s, 2012s will know what blurple is. So you have to run that kind of stuff with the same intent as you do the financial side.
Sure.
And the integration of businesses is something that, pays dividends over time. And again, you could also end up, ruining your pure water by adding a drop of petrol by mistake, right? And it becomes a different thing and becomes toxic. So there's these real upsides and downsides that you have to manage intentionally when it comes to culture.
Sure. Earlier on, you mentioned, or you touched on, a different working model with returning back to work, hybrid working models, or even exclusively remote working models. How do you then build a culture in that type of setup where people are not in the office often or at all? And because of that, there isn't really an established grounding of how we do things around here.
So, South Africa is full of Manchester United fans, right?
Is it?
I had to pick one. but take the passion with which we, South Africans follow the Premiership.
Yeah.
How many of those people have actually been to a game?
Not a lot.
In an actual stadium?
Not a lot.
Met one of the players? Spoken to the coaches?
Even less.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But there they are singing, you will never walk alone, and they are part of the team's culture. So remote doesn't necessarily mean cultural distance. It just means that you have to work at it differently. So I look at sports teams, right, where 80% of the people that generate revenue for that business, in fact, only the costs step onto the pitch. All the revenue comes from people watching elsewhere, broadcast rights and the rest.
Sure.
And you identify strongly as part of the team. And for me, that's what you need to consider. Like how viral can what we want to be as a business become? If your culture is stymied by the fact that somebody doesn't come into the office, it might be easier to actually find a way to make it more relevant to them at home than to try and get them into the office.
Sure.
The easy work is come back to the office now.
Yeah.
Right. The little bit harder work is how do we make sure that Paco feels a part of this business, even though he only comes in on the rare occasion. So we, over the last 2 years, we joked at Blue Sky and we said, look, we had 4 C's why people come into the office.
Okay.
Right? There's collaboration, right? And nothing beats, I'm sorry, anybody else that believes in virtual productivity tools. Whiteboard, Post-its, and markers. Right? Best collaboration tools ever.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to daisy chain machines or look at each other's code over each other's shoulders. Like there's something about proximity when it comes, like physical proximity when it comes to collaboration. Then you come to the office to commiserate. Like if Mbali is down, making her feel better from behind the screen is probably less effective than if Mbali knows that she can come into the office. She doesn't even have to tell anybody that she's down. But there's just a vibe in the office that will fill her cup without her having to say something. Or there might be somebody she can talk to there, and they end up having a conversation on the balcony, right? So commiserate. The third C is again doing boo 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 on Teams and pressing that button and hand claps is so much less impactful than walking in and ringing the bell at the office because you did some really, really cool stuff. And everybody in the office doesn't tell you to shh, we're working here. They clap with you and that lasts for 5 minutes and you're done. The fourth thing we did is we said you can't cook virtually. So if you're on the office on a Friday at 9 o'clock and part of the head count that was there, 12-ish, 2-ish, we are buying burgers or boerewors rolls, and by 3 o'clock, if you've managed your day correctly, you can wind down with a buri roll, a drink, and maybe the Bluetooth speaker comes out, or the chessboard, or the Monopoly game, and jiggy jiggy, it's 7 o'clock and people are still at the office.
On a Friday.
And you didn't change a policy. Right. So those 4 C's became really important for us. And somebody added the W in the front, because sometimes actually, if you're gonna knuckle down and do work, it's best done from home. No distractions. If you're doing a deployment for a client, an out-of-town client, you don't want Themba trying to talk to you about, Star Wars when you're in the middle of this deployment. You want to dedicate focus. And sometimes focus is best achieved at home.
Sure. Again, being intentional about the culture and the energy you want to create. Yeah. That brings me to my last question for this part of our discussion. What do you envision the future of workplace culture to be like, just considering emerging technologies and just the changing ways of work?
Sure. I guess it's industry dependent, right? I mean, the fear around AI is probably the same kind of fear the Luddites experienced with the printing press. Like, it's this new thing that's going to come and radically change work, and it did, and so did every industrial revolution thereafter. I guess it's, we need to become mindful of the impact and intentional about the pivot.
Sure. Please expand on that.
So what is it that AI is going to do? So, you and I were talking about, my wife is in a very different field to the one I'm in, and it's in fact, I was in a conference yesterday where it was legal, finance, and audit, highest risk of being impacted by AI, right? So I'm like, okay, pretty picture, scary graph, but what does that mean, or what does that, what do you do? So do my wife and I have a conversation about her pivoting? Does she get to do something else? Are we going to become a single salary household in our children's lifetime? Is my soft people world really as safe as we think it is? And that's what we don't do a lot of. We don't sit down and look at the things that scare us or make us happy in a critical way. And that balance is required. And then when it's time to pivot, what is it they talk about? And you also certified in SAFE, right? Because we had to be.
Yes.
the unemotional pivot that agile requires, right?
Yeah.
And it's my grandfather. Then it loses a little bit of oomph in translation, but he's like, Themba, just make reality your friend, man. If that thing is blue, stop trying to convince everybody it's pink. That bloody thing is blue, and it will be blue no matter what you say. Now, if you don't like blue, don't pick it up.
Sure.
Or paint it pink. But talking is not going to change anything. So when you see, the diminishing returns here, and there's that famous case study about how cars put horse carts out of business. But it also put the buggy whip businesses out of business. The guys that made the whips for the people that drive the car.
Yes. And that was an unintended consequence.
Yeah, but the buggy whip people should have been going, guys, there's going to be less buggies on the road.
Yes.
Let's stop making whips. And then you do what BMW did. So BMW logo, you familiar with the
with the logo, but I don't know what the story is behind it.
So the logo is a propeller.
Okay.
Airplane propeller. Those squares.
Yes.
And it's because BMW used to make fighter jets. And they pivoted to cars.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Pivot.
They were intentional about the pivot.
Yeah, I think it was going to be a little bit difficult for Germany to continue producing those kind of airplanes at the time when they were making them.
Yeah. Be intentional about the pivot. What was the statement before that?
So understand the impact and be intentional about the pivot.
Got it. Got it. In closing, I usually ask my guests a few bonus questions.
Shoot.
So, what book, podcast, or article have you read or listened to that shifted your perspective about work? And how did it shift your perspective?
Sure. So, in my long lost youth, somebody introduced me to a book called The Fifth Principle by Peter Senge. Short Senge. Surname is Senge. I think the first name is Peter. And it was systems thinking. So he's like considered the father of systems thinking. And this book just talks about how you need to consider ripples and unintended consequences. And like, here's a book that thinks the same way I do.
Yeah.
And that I think that book changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I realized that I'm maybe not crazy. And the dark side of systems thinking is something that I experience, I try to manage in myself, which is it's easy to overthink. Because at some stage, like the ripples will reach China, but you have no control of those ripples. You control the event that caused the ripple, and maybe 500 meters of ripple.
Yeah.
But my mind naturally goes boom, 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 and at some stage I have to stop. So that for me is a foundational book.
Yeah.
And then Lord of the Rings.
Okay. And application to your work life? How did that change?
But so I'm in the people space. I do change management. So when we sit down and say we're implementing SAP, I'm going, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. The techies and the project managers have a fairly easy job of, they do the code, they put the solution in. But this thing is going to change the way people work. It's going to make things faster. It's going to make things slower. It's going to replace this, but you can get it over there. And that systemic view of what an SAP implementation takes on the people side is what training. How do you determine what training Mbali is going to need?
Sure.
If you are a stamp licker today and stamp linking is now automated, what are you going to do tomorrow?
Sure.
And one of the answers might be you're redundant, but why don't we use this opportunity to upskill you in an area that's going to take even more strain, because over there, this thing is producing 500 widgets, not 20. So let's move the stamp licker to that process where additional capacity is required. Train them up so they have the capability. And by the time you go live, nobody's licking stamps and you're not having a glut on the side where you've optimized efficiencies.
Yeah. And what does wellness in the workplace look like for you?
Wellness in the workplace for me looks like me coming home and my wife and kids recognizing the person that left in the morning.
Sure.
So, that ride home is often not enough time to fully decompress after a day's work. So we let me not say I sometimes leak when there's still organizational residue on me when I step through the door. And if I've had a good day, it's amazing. If I've had a bad day, it's a little less so.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just the job. If you've in my area, you might have had somebody come in and talk to you about how they just need to be booked in for rehab, and that might be the last conversation you have in the day. Or something more serious, or somebody is on the brink of what we started this conversation on. And for me, culture tempers the highs and the lows in an organization, the same way that maybe meds do for people that suffer with high highs and low lows. And if your culture can be the great equivocator that creates comfort and balance, then you're doing something right from a culture perspective.
I was going to ask you if you have any closing remarks, but I think that's such a beautiful way to end this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Themba, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the gift of your insight. It's just really great connecting with you, I think, in a different capacity and to explore your brain and expertise on something that is often overlooked but significantly important and felt.
Yeah. And then, but if we don't start focusing on this thing, right?
Yes.
And start understanding it. So, 10 years ago, people would roll their eyes when we spoke about change management and the people side of projects, right? Now, if you hand in a proposal and it doesn't have change management and training in it, you're out of the running. Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing the same thing, emotional well-being and feelings, largely because they're not understood. Maybe even more largely because it's like a sensitive topic, because everybody has feelings. The responsibility to help people navigate through that, either by highlighting gaps in understanding or helping them on the journey is huge. So the work that you're doing might not be fully understood or appreciated in the short term, but long term, I can see it now. I can see, and it's beyond policy, right? It's just, Peter, who was my talent manager, once came to the office wearing a cap saying, "Don't be gak." and I was like, yeah,
that's it.
Like that's it.
Yeah.
And the reason why I use that example is, him and I used to talk openly about when we weren't feeling emotionally centered at times in the business. And it's hard because I think everybody feels it, but where do you go and what do I do? And
what do I do?
And is EAP my friend?
Yes.
And is HR is HR for the people or for the company? And now if I'm talking to, Salamina, like, is this now in confidence? I in another organization, I had to let go of an HR administrator who was the only one who knew a piece of information because I'd asked her to deal with it sensitively. Like, literally, just you and I knew about this. And then in the corridor, I hear somebody going, "But don't you know Tsepo is going through this thing?" And I went back and I'm like, "Mbali, I told you this is sensitive. Only you and I know about this. I haven't said anything to anybody, but there is Tsepang talking about it in the corridor. So you're done here." Because the only credit my team has to deal with in the organization is trust.
That's it.
And integrity. And this is not it. If this ever gets broader than this, we might actually even face popular issues and.
Yes.
But no, we can't have you on this team anymore.
Trust, integrity equals psychological safety.
And consistency. Hugely important.
Yeah. I'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight. And thank you for watching. I hope you found this conversation valuable. Please do continue to engage with our content across all different platforms. If you are on Instagram, continue engaging there. On YouTube, do the same. And do share this podcast across all major podcast streaming platforms. I beg your pardon. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I'll catch you in the next episode.